When preparing this panel, we found that in Germany we have no statistics whatsoever on what accidents happen and what the root cause of such accidents was. So we asked the Employers' Liability Insurance Association, we asked different associations of different trades, we asked them about accident statistics, and no one could give us a comprehensive answer, even though this is such an interesting question. On a daily basis, we use the media. The media always present individual events. Remember the Love Parade disaster 2 years ago? It was widely covered by the media. So the media have a strong focus on individual events. What happens in the media? Thanks to a colleague from the Schmid-Lieke law firm in charge of a very interesting internet portal, we got an evaluation. This colleague of ours has been observing every press notice and article for 10 years concerning events and accidents occurring in the context of events, and he has been observing these reports and evaluating them in his internet portal, and he was able to provide us with charts about event-related accidents. These are the global accident figures that were covered by DPA and other press agencies. We are an international conference, but we do certainly have a German focus, so we have to look at the national as well as the international aspect. And this is what the situation looks like in Germany. It is terrifying at first sight, isn't it? I hope that we don't cover up all the slides. It's different from the setting we typically have. To my right or to your left, we see the year 2013. So we are going back in time from left to right. Now, please consider that this is what the media reported and covered. This is not an official authority's statistics. And this statistics reflects the perception of our accidents by the media. What is significant here is that from 2010 onward, we've seen quite high figures. What was back then in 2010? Well, it was the Love Parade disaster. Have there been more accidents ever since, or have they simply received wider media coverage? Unfortunately, we cannot provide you with any more neutral or any more far-reaching figures because this portal just covers media coverage. But we have to note that whenever an event is perceived as dangerous by the general public won't want to attend the event. So statistics like these are quite relevant to us. What are the probable root causes in media coverage? In 2010, we have a huge area, a rush and crush of people. Why was that? Because of the Love Parade. 534 people injured as a result. The next significant area or segment of this cake diagram is the weather. Bad weather conditions caused 44 accidents. Then we have pyrotechnics, technical issues, and violence. Let's take a look at violence. Here we have seen significant changes. Let's look at the next slide. This is the repetition for 2011. That was just 1 year later. Now compare the crush of people and violence as causes of incidents. And if we compare the Love Parade year and the year in which a lot of violence was reported, by irritation gas, by other forms of violence, we can see that the repetition looks quite different. 257 events related to violence, attacks, assault, etc. Look at the next slide. Here we can see figures based on media agencies, press agencies, and the internet. Violence, attacks, gas assaults, etc. And what else is interesting here? We see a clear increase in technical causes. And if we now look at these figures in the course of time, we can see that in media perception, violence is becoming more and more preeminent. Other causes have the same or even a declining level of coverage. And of course, we always need to look at why these media reports have focused or have shifted their focus in such a way. Weather, tempestuous weather, wind, global warming, all this might be cited as a reason for accidents and injuries. Of course, at the technical level, you have to adjust. And this is going to be the first topic of our panel. I would like to ask my colleagues about whether there are any figures or statistics available in their area of work. Okay, maybe Austria can take the lead now. Yes, I've been told that I'm widely audible here. Well, at our event centers, we don't have any statistics or recordings of such events or incidents. We do operate the football stadium, but we are not the organizers there. Instead, it is the local football association, and they, using the Austrian Football League's statistics, do have statistics on injured persons. But in recent years, ever since I have been co-responsible for the stadium, we've hardly seen any violence inside the football stadium. Violence does take place in the context of football, but it takes place outside the stadium, and it is not included in the stadium statistics. Well, this is a kind of cooking the balance, obviously, because there are things happening outside the stadiums. There are cases of violence, but in our stadium there is no injuries, no violence. Of course, we have large pop concerts and there are ladies who go unconscious, but that's the only injury we can report. Mr. Löhr, you are very active in the field. If we look at the media, we have the feeling that more and more cases of violence occur. We have more and more fans who are prone to violence. We have more and more Bengalic fires, etc. That's what people think when reading the newspapers. Can you confirm this trend? Is that really true, or is it just a media thing?
Ich würde sagen, also an der Stelle.
Well, I think it's very hard to say for an external lawyer. I think there's a different phenomenon that I actually observe at the moment. So the conference of the ministers of the interior think about that a lot at the moment, and they probably reach a conclusion in April. It is really about the responsibility in football stadiums. So what are we going to do? And the crimes that are no longer part of the statistics in Austria, you know, on the way from the stations to the stadiums. So it's now really about making the people that cause that kind of thing responsible for that, because it is them that cause the discrimination continuation of games, and it is really the operator's responsibility that is to be expanded into the public space. So there's a couple of reflections going on. So there's actually a legal opinion that was asked for by the ministers of the Interior. So violence in football is one of the most important issues at the moment, at least on the political level, and that is actually what they look at the moment. And I think the lawyers taking a look at that have been asked to come up with their findings until the end of April, and they deal with that kind of situation. So it remains very much important. So you were saying that more and more things are actually being done. So are more and more things happening? So is it ever more important to do things? Is audience behavior changing? So is the visitor now more aggressive, or is it just on the agenda of politicians now? Well, is the visitor more aggressive now? If you see things like in Cologne, like on the bus from Gladbach, then obviously you see that kind of event. Obviously, there's a lot of media coverage on that kind of thing, that the bus is being attacked, at a rest facility on the way from A to B. I don't know if that kind of situation happened in the past, but at least it was not as widely covered by the media. I don't really want to judge that kind of thing, but it is now very much discussed, and therefore it is a political factor, and therefore it also affects us as event managers, because football is one kind of event. So the legislator needs to react to that, and if the legislator does not react to that, then it might actually also impact other events in terms of risk evaluations, risk assessments, and measures to be taken. And that might actually be a thing that has been harvested by the press, but it's still something we have to put up with and live with. So apart from that, Alma, so does that actually have a kind of accident statistic or something like that? Well, now it is really, again, about the classical work that associations do. So obviously we try to avoid accidents. That is our most important target. And there is a couple of topics that we have statistics on, but it's not our task at all to publish that kind of result. So it's, for instance, our way to deal with the environment. Is there environmental damages violations? What about theft? So when do people steal most? So there are numbers that are available, but we don't really publish that kind of statistics, because we are actually working on these issues, but dangers to life and limb. So you can rest assured that all our members that are organizing fairs in Germany are basically, or 90% of them are basically owned by the public. They are either owned by the federal states or they are subsidiaries of the municipalities. So do rest assured that we obviously are under a lot of pressure to be efficient and to also be profitable, but we're not like a public company that is listed at the stock exchange. So we have to create conditions that also allow for security and safety. So obviously there is also the profit. The mayors are very happy if their events attract a lot of people. So therefore a German trade fair company can also create surroundings that allow for most conditions. So if you just take a look at others, and then you wonder what things actually get broken in China. So we actually have the highest standard globally here in Germany in terms of trade fair companies, and also we have the highest safety levels here in Germany. So if there are accidents happening during the setup of stands, that is not fair to blame us, because also in the workshops of factories you have a lot of accidents. We are talking about the event, and we are talking about event safety, and there's a lot of responsibilities. So the operator is only one, the organizer is only one, but you have a huge number of exhibitors, huge responsibilities for what is happening at the individual stands. And I've mentioned that already, 6 million rented square meters that are rented out, and 280,000 exhibitors. And there's a lot of people, so there are a lot of things obviously are feasible, but we don't really have casualties, fatal accidents. I can't really recall one. There's not crowds and fairs. I can't really recall any panic situation where we had some panic attack at a kind of German trade fair. And the trade fair organizations obviously do their very best. There might actually be a consumer kind of exhibition and God knows where, and then there's a thunderstorm, and then there's things happening and things like that. But then obviously the regulations were not maintained. That is the risk of every outdoor event. But if we just talk about German trade fairs, we actually talk about the 20 companies in Germany that are perfectly organized, that are perfectly equipped. You have very, very clearly structured visitors access. So we usually always know how many people are on the territory of the fair. So do rest rest assured that there's not a lot happening here, but obviously we have to be alert. We have to watch what is happening. We try to harmonize technical regulations for all German trade for territories. So there is obviously a kind of regulation in place. There's rules in terms of technical equipment, in terms of things like that. We don't really know that kind of example from Moscow. So if you are basically on the last step from the ladder, that is usually the act of commerce, industry, and crafts that take a look at that. But we actually choose to live in a very, very good partnership with our exhibitors, and without actually wanting to give you a lot of nice words, there's not a lot of accidents and incidents happening on German trade fair grounds.
Herr Ruhling?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any statistics about incidents? Nothing in the USA?
Nothing. This is going to be confusing for me. Translation from English into English. No, we don't really have this information. I think that the things that you have shown have been very interesting. We have had people who wanted us to collect statistics on accidents and also essentially what failed or who didn't do who was at fault. And this information in the United States is very difficult to get. Usually when somebody is injured, it winds up becoming a civil suit. And usually the civil suit is never actually, the trial is never actually completed. They usually wind up settling out of court. And almost always part of the settlement is an agreement not to talk about it or any further. So we don't have good statistics on this. The Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration, until recently, essentially paid no attention to the entertainment industry because they felt they needed to focus their resources on other industries where there were more workers at risk and where there were obviously higher accident rates, which usually meant building construction and general manufacturing. Under the Obama administration, there have been more statements of interest in the entertainment industry, but actual action, I haven't seen anything.
Okay, one more question. In Deutschland haben
In Germany, there is the supervisory body of commerce, industry, and there's also the fireworkers and things like that. So what authorities do you have in place in the United States? Is that a job of the association, or who would actually be in charge?
who is the controlling instant? Who controls the events?
In the United States?
Yes, in the United States. Only the police?
No. I'm trying to replay. I put the headphones back on, so I got you talking in English and also the English translation a little bit later. So I'm trying to figure out exactly what you mean. If you have an event like this, who is in control? Mm-hmm. This is one of the problems where it's very difficult to figure out. There needs to be somebody in control. But you showed me a list of questions. The Indiana State Fair stage collapse, for example. This happened in the state of Indiana Capitol. And it's very clear from that nobody was in control. They wound up with the final determination of whether or not to cancel the event being sort of laid at the door of the state police, the state troopers, but they knew nothing about the structure and how it was designed. Mm-hmm. There were also the event organizers who wanted to have the event go on. So it wound up being this extended discussion of who was going to be in control and who was going to actually say when the event was going to close while the storm was approaching. And when they finally decided that they needed to evacuate, they were about 10 minutes too late. And then their plan for evacuation had the audience walking across in front of the stage, so if the stage collapsed, it would fall right on them, and that's exactly what happened. So it's not clear. This is one of the things that needs to be worked out for every event, sort of what is the structure, at least for safety. Who reports to who makes the final decision. Mm-hmm. We are in the process of revising our standard for outdoor structures, and one of the questions that we're still trying to refine is how is that determined? How do you decide who is ultimately in charge of this event and who ultimately says, the wind is too strong, we're leaving?
Well, in Germany, we actually have an event manager.
It's a person who is in charge
for
this in Germany. Mm-hmm. You mind, I just wrote you an email about that.
Yeah.
And do you have a person like that?
No, we should.
You should.
We should. It's not clear. I mean, In our standards, we say that there is somebody who is in charge, but how do we translate that from what's on the paper to the actual event? And in actual events, it's not, it depends on, some places it's very clear, in other places it's not clear. Many places, the Indiana State Fair, for example, they had sort of a long history of just sort of doing the thing and everything worked out fine and everybody gets along. But there was no real organization of who reports to whom.
It's a self-organization, yeah?
What's that?
It's eine Selbstorganisation.
It is something like an organization of itself, something that is very often happening in terms of the fairs.
They organize themselves.
They organize themselves, yes,
okay.
yes, yeah.
Okay, jetzt gehen wir mal, Herr Kluge.
Okay, Mr. Kluge, now your microphone should work. Yes, it's working. Wonderful. Okay, now let me ask you the initial question again. Does the ZDF TV station have statistics to that end, and what has your experience been? Or if there is no statistics, what is your feeling? Well, we have been observing accidents of various kinds in a very detailed way. Occupational accidents will automatically be reported to me. And if there are accidents among the visitors, well, that's a little more difficult to track, but we do capture them very exactly. And every training of security people, of hostess people, etc., are based on real-life cases. Very often, members of the audience, visitors, sue us for damages. So we have become quite sensitive. We try to capture every input we can get about incidents, and we log them very carefully. And we want to extract experience from these incidents in order to be able to improve our processes and procedures. We want to learn from our mistakes. You asked for accident statistics, however, and statistics about accidents are a problem, really. If I have 3 accidents within a longer period of time, this is not a proper statistics, is it? I can go and define the number of accidents per 1,000 employees, for instance. For instance, if I keep statistics for the purposes of comparison, I need to have a reference value. And sometimes it doesn't work properly if you have a very small number of accidents. But independently of that ratio, the question that is interesting remains, if something goes wrong, what is it that goes wrong? Are there any typical kinds of accidents or any particularly memorable accidents or things that keep going wrong in outdoor TV productions? Well, here I have to ask, what are we talking about? Is it visitor statistics or staff statistics? Well, when talking about the organization as a whole, we are talking about the entire production, installation, transportation, implementation. This is viewed as a whole because we want to design our safety rules and regulations in such a way as to enable the visitors and the staff to work safely. Well, we usually have outdoor events with many visitors where we have to take specific precautions, for instance, meadows or lawn areas that people walk on in wet weather after there has been a rain, or icy conditions in winter can be a problem and a particular outdoor safety hazard. When it comes to our staff, we have different kinds of accidents, different levels of severity. People fall down, people get bruised, etc. So it would be BGI 8700, mechanical risks such as falls or bruises, etc. This is the main type of accident. Yes. Let me tell you a story. I can briefly tell you a story that shows what happens if an accident occurs and what consequences it has independently of the statistics. Let me talk about the system and the automatic responses that we have in Germany. Let me give you the example of an accident that occurred during a major show. It was one of those cuts that you cure by just two stitches, a very simple thing. The colleague was a first aider and he acted correctly. He stopped the blood and he called 112, which is the emergency number. The ambulance came, the police came in, and then it was up to the police to decide whether or not they should come in. But if there is a spectacular TV show, they decide to come. And they came with a police car and they asked who was responsible, the production manager and several other people who were responsible, and they were called into the police vehicle and they were asked to show all the documentation about safety training, etc. Oh, this is a very interesting aspect. We have to write down risk assessment documentation, but this very often generates more work than it generates security. A colleague of mine once asked, do we have to document more if we do more or if we do less? Well, whenever you analyze risks and dangers, you have to write down more than if you haven't. You have to write down more if you haven't done anything, because then you run the risk of negligence than if you have taken all the necessary precautions. If you have taken all the necessary precautions, you don't have to make any documentation anymore in many cases. May I come in with some humor here? We have a saying that says, whoever writes will be permanently remembered, and this is something that can be held true internationally. Mr. Husmann, now let me ask you a question. What is the situation like in Düsseldorf? Does the fire brigade have statistical documentation? Yes, we do have statistical figures. For the last 10 years, we've covered all events, whether they were small parish events or large football matches. We told the rescue organizations to give us all the figures of their action, of their deployments, and we asked them to give us a very detailed setup in line with the color coding, red, yellow, and green, that is severe, medium, and light injuries. And for each and every single event, I can tell you about how many patients were taken to hospital, how many patients received medical treatment, etc. And we do that in order to improve our safety assessments for future events. And if there is an event at which nothing at all happened, I typically pick up the phone and I talk to people. I talk to the managers of the event or to the operators, just in order to get a feel for what has been happening. And over the years, we have developed an excellent feel of what's going on at the events. And we cannot always say that in large events there are many accidents, and at small events there is nothing at all. Sometimes you have a soccer match with 50,000 people and nothing happens at all, and you have a small fun fair and many things happen. Does that tell us that the limit of 5,000 people, which has been criticized before, that this is not actually viable as a parameter? Shouldn't we rather look at the entirety of events and on that basis decide on what safety concept is required? I don't know how they come up with this 5,000 visitor figure. We don't make our decision dependent on how many people are supposed to be there or are there. We look at the individual case. We've seen large events, 20,000 children at a children's party where nothing at all happened, and small events where things did happen. Is the audience itself sometimes the biggest hazard, or is it the weather in some cases, or is it alcohol, or is it technical stability? Well, it's a mixture of them all. It can be up to people in the audience. It can be up to the weather. There are different factors that contribute to accidents occurring. Well, we cannot say we have a one solution fits all approach. No, we typically have events that are deemed quite unproblematic, and in the end they do come up with problems, and sometimes it's the other way around. Think of a Tote Hosen concert. You have thousands of people in the arena. It's a mega event. Everybody wants to see Tote Hosen in the Rhine Stadium, and sometimes you have many medical treatment cases here. And if we have Andre Rieu playing at the same location where everybody would say, oh, it's not a problem at all, it's all elderly people. But actually, the Tote Hosen concert saw fewer medical treatment cases. The people there are young and fit, and they are quite knowledgeable about the situation like this, whereas if you see Andre Rieu in the arena, well, the first time we had him at the arena, we were lacking experience. There were so many senior citizens in the audience, and we really ended up in trouble. Why was that? Because these people are unexperienced. They get a ticket for Christmas, and they think it's like when they go to the opera, where they have their underground car park. No, they have long traffic jams to cope with, and then they park their car on a car park a kilometer away, and then those elderly ladies start jogging. They start running because they don't want to miss the beginning of the event, and they are already late. And we had many, many medical treatment cases at the end of that concert, many more than we had at the rock concert with so many young and fit people. Or let me give you another example. We had the Aida opera at the arena, and here we said, okay, now we have to print early arrival recommended on the ticket. My parents are more than 80 years old. If they go to the opera, they won't consult the internet first in order to be informed about the processes. But on the other hand, those senior citizens are the only audience from which you don't have to take batons away. Well, you can take their umbrellas away. Sometimes elderly people can become quite aggressive with their umbrellas. Well, do you have the feeling that the legal situation as it currently is appropriate? After the Love Parade, there was an outcry in favor of stricter regulations. We are going to talk about the legislative situation now. Do you feel that our legislation is sufficient, or do we need more regulations? Well, as I said this morning, we have a host of different rules and regulations, which, however, cannot always be attributed. Sometimes you need a separate approval for filling wastewater into the municipal sewage system. I feel that we need an event law giving us a legal framework for indoor and outdoor events. Okay, let me pass this question on to Mr. Löhr, to my right. A law on events. You are an expert when it comes to the law governing the places of assembly, and there is a revision of this act going on at the moment. What changes are we in for? To a certain extent, it depends, or it is related to what Mr. Husmann just said. We have a situation where we have to update and amend the regulation governing venues of assembly now and then. We have a green paper that you can find on the internet on the AG Bau website, and it refers to open-air events. I wrote an article on that, the disaster after the disaster, and it related to the musical week, not the music trade show that we have here, the musical week. We have a change going on the regulation side, because a venue is defined as a venue with a fixed stage. It will no longer be a mobile stage that will define a venue. We do have fixed stadiums and arenas with fixed stages, with fixed seats, etc. But on other open-air venues, we no longer call them places of assembly by the definition of this regulation. Why is that? Well, the decision seems to have been made that in the future the construction supervisory authorities should no longer be responsible for such events. But who is responsible now? We have no legislation covering open-air events on green fields. So we have recommendations in North Rhine-Westphalia that have been co-developed by the Minister of the Interior of North Rhine-Westphalia. I joined several working committees of his, and now this model regulation on places of assembly will be revised. There is no way back here. I know. In Bavaria, it has been introduced before. It was enforced on December 7th already. So actually, Bavaria has a special situation. Bavaria and Thuringia are the only federal states that have an amusement paragraph in their police law. And it says that whenever there is an amusement event, it must be notified to the authorities of public order. So if you go to Munich and you want to have an event, you will get a document outlining the terms and conditions, and this document applies construction law to your event. But this is a very unique situation, and it doesn't apply to other federal states. So now you cannot organize an event that is to take place in a year from now because there is complete legal uncertainty. So we said this is not acceptable because we cannot have people stop organizing events for a year just because the legal situation and its development is not predictable. For instance, we cannot tell today how many people will be allowed on a certain area in the future. So here we need a discussion with Mr. Husmann and many others, and we have had such discussions, and we came up with the idea of setting up a legal framework, and we've been sitting down with several experts in the past 3 months, and we came up with a model regulation. We, as the representatives of private law associations, and on the I-ESC website you can download our model regulation. It is a suggestion that we have come up with in order to fill the gap that the ministry's inaction has left behind. We want to set up an even framework governing all kinds of events, including Facebook parties. So this is the development that has been going on recently, and this will actually affect the trade show world too. We have issued an EVPC statement, the European Association of Event Centers, and we have actually arrived at a point where we need to clarify the legal situation. The model regulation has already been notified to Brussels. The new assembly regulation has been redefined, and it has been sent to Brussels for notification, so it is bound to be adopted. Okay, there are gaps in regulation and in public authorities' action. Mr. Löhr, what is the association's responsibility here? Do we need to come up with industry standards to close the gaps? We need more and more rules that we can go by. And then the obligation to ensure safe traffic is there, no matter whether there is a specific obligation or rule, or whether there is not. It is just a general obligation to ensure undisturbed traffic. So, do you feel that the associations are in a position to come up with a specific solution, or do you feel that this might lead to undesirable restrictions? Well, I've been working in the associations business for 30 years and almost 25 years for the Trade Show Association. And I've been lobbying in Brussels and in Berlin, and I'm a lobbying enthusiast. But there is no single issue which makes for lobbying as difficult as safety does. Politicians are paid for ensuring that the citizen is safe. So if you actually meddle with the officials and authorities of 16 different federal states that ultimately have to sign off their rules and regulations, and then there comes an association lobbyist who says, now we have too much safety, we don't need that much safety. Those guys will say, oh, Mr. Levin, you have a daughter and you have a grandchild and you want them to be safe at all times. You are immoral, you are unethical if you don't care about safety. Of course I want safety for everybody, but it must be manageable, it must be plausible, it must be handleable. Of course it is no fun to go lobbying in safety issues because they always impute to you that you're against safety. You want to risk people's lives and health. And now try and get all those guys together at a table. Together with Mr. Löhr, we've tried to extend the event regulations to the trade show area. Up to then, trade show areas were not considered event venues. And now we tried to be included in the rules and regulations governing this field. But actually, these specimen regulations or model regulations are all not mandatory, and if the Bavarians believe that the escape route must be longer, they will write down that their escape route is longer. So you have a model regulation, but the individual states don't have to adhere to it. And this makes lobbying work extremely difficult. It is so difficult to come up with a central solution because there is no single point of contact. There is the RG Bau. They show how difficult it really is, and there is the specimen regulation or model regulation that we can take as a basis, as a model, but it does not provide for unified regulations. Of course, we can make clear that we have a single opinion and that we know what we want for Germany, and then our contact people will say, okay, we'll take that along to the conference of the federal states representatives, and then it will all be split up. It's a disaster, and that's what I live off.
And obviously, we do hope that it is now the election year. We now obviously hope for some impact, and obviously, we hope to achieve a lot in politics. And obviously, we do a lot of lobbying, with the political parties, and we are really telling them to get things done. It's not 2.5 years after Love Parade. You can't really turn around. We are done. The responsibility is still there, so you can't really, ignore that. And if there is sufficient public outcry, then I think it is about this year where you can still make a difference, and next year is going to be different after all the elections and all that. So, Mr. Altenburger, so what about you in Austria? What about you with the outdoor territories? It's quite similar. We're seeing a similar situation in Steiermark. You probably know that Austria also has 9 federal states, 9 legislations, and obviously 9 regulations on event safety, and obviously they are all being very different. The ones that we have in Steiermark is being revised at the moment. Ever since 2012, there has been a lot of focus on the skiing World Cup, and then our federal state government, they actually came up with a new legislation which is not really compatible with a couple of things. And the safety regulation that's being discussed now is actually 46 pages big. And if you just check the website, then you basically see that it is 20 or 25 kind of different positions on that draft, and basically they're all saying the same. However, it remains a fact that we are not really differentiating between the different venues, so the two venues could actually be approved. However, trade fairs would actually be expressly excluded from that. So basically we have this kind of room where there's no legislation. However, if you have an audience fair, and if there's a music presentation or a music band, if they just play music in the morning, then that is going to be considered an event that would actually need to supply with the Assembly Act. However, the trade fair would not actually fall into that category. So therefore, obviously, we in Austria at the moment have not, kind of like event safety. So what is the differentiation? When is it an event? So does it depend on the artist reading a book or doing a presentation, or what is it? Well, it is really our there's not really that much of a difference between the Christian Christmas carol or a pop concert. That is actually what a daily paper said. So there's a very vague interpretation of the differences actually. So basically they are saying when there's a stage, then it is an area. Everything else is the audience stage, and also only the audience space is going to be included in the assessment. And if you have something that is happening above the stage, is not part of the Assembly Act. It might just be a workplace, and then it falls under that category. And unless, of course, there is a visitors coming to the stage, and then obviously you can come in and measure the stage. Or that might be interesting. Visitors could come to stage. So I would like to ask Mr. Kluge again. So what is that interaction like between the visitors, so between the guests of your TV show and obviously the rest of the show on stage? So how is that being organized when it comes to the second channel, to ZDF? So if you're involved as a visitor, if you actually join them on stage, there's always these visitors that are being picked so that have very, very few contacts with the show. Then we assume that that visitor moves is as safe as has to be ensured. There are obviously activities where the visitors is more involved. And there's, for instance, something on the television program. We had kind of an audience camera. And then they picked him, and then we wanted him to inform backstage, so they would actually be more involved. So that is really a visitor that is participating, and there's a very clear definition by the trade unions, and then he is basically considered that way, and he also gets a small allowance. So he would actually have that kind of staff status, and then you would know that is what it is. And social insurance is what you have to pay. No? Okay. Nobody here from the financial authorities. So thank you very much for that piece of information. Mr. Ruling. So. So, what about safety regulations in the United States? Plaza is very active. And also, you have your handbook, that was your manual that was published, and apparently it's quite an interesting phase. Could you talk about that?
Sure. Well, there will be more, because of recent accidents, there will be more regulation in the United States. People have asked me, after the Indiana State Fair collapse, I had many reporters calling me and asking me if we felt that stages needed to be regulated. Plaza is a trade association, and I have to say that so many of our members would think that I am absolutely crazy if I said, yes, please, we need more regulation. But what we do want, though, is that if there are going to be regulations, as I pointed out earlier, there are 63 sort of state-level organizations, and then hundreds of other organizations below them, and it's those lower-level ones that would be actually writing the regulations. What we would like them to do is, if they do feel they're going to set in a formal permit procedure, an inspection procedure, and so on, that they use our standards as the basis for this. Where we know in the United States that various governments are considering regulations, we reach out to them to make sure that they're aware of the standards, how they work, and sort of encourage them to use them. But large-scale lobbying, you might say, in the United States winds up being difficult because there are all these different governmental organizations, and also because with our laws, for example, if there's a certain trip point, if a certain percentage of Plaza's budget is spent in directly contacting the legislature in lobbying activities, then we become lobbyists. We need to register with the government, and to the extent that our budget goes to those activities, the membership dues that our members pay to us are no longer tax deductible. So we wind up having to report back to our members how much of their money was used in lobbying and how much of their money then they can no longer count as a business expense, which is tax deductible. So it gets very complicated. As a result, most of our efforts are focused on writing standards, encouraging people to use these standards so that we do not have accidents, so that there is not the pressure to have legislation, to legislate these things, to regulate the industry, and then sort of suggest that the standards be used when it does look like regulation and legislation is going to be enacted. And that's pretty much where we are.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Wenn wir das mal betrachten, kann man eigentlich den Faktor, den
Let's have a look at the whole discussion. I think we can't really find one specific potential for risk. But what we heard from all workshops today is that communication is one of the most important aspects in security of events. And that is what I would like to ask Mr. Hussmann. During the preparation of an event, communication is very important. Now, from my own experience, I know that authorities often deny carrying around another walkie-talkie. From your experience, don't you think there should be a commitment that everybody is involved in the whole communication process? But maybe you already work like that in Düsseldorf. What could you tell us from your experience?
So what about your manager? So how is he involved in the communication process? I don't really want to have people walking around with different phones, mobile phones. You know, when you ever work with a musical conference or a musical concert, so there's one headset that's going to work because obviously there's so much noise. So what we actually do is we give people that work in a coordination unit, they have one broadcasting unit, and the colleagues, they basically have their own headsets. And they have one device that is being given to them by the service provider, and communication takes place in the container, sometimes also on site. It doesn't really make any sense. There's the fire brigades, there's the police. If everybody has, their own device, then basically everybody has 5 phones in there, and that is not going to work. So people have to work. They have to make sure that they go to the control units where communication takes place, and that is the point where communication goes out. It could also be a 24-hour kind of thing. It could also be a skybox or whatever. But if everybody takes out phones that don't work, that's not good. So not a technical solution, but an organizational solution. That is very correct.
Now, to wrap this up, I would like to ask you to do the following. What is the aspect that you would say there are legal aspects, there are other aspects, but looking 5 years ahead into the future, what do you think is going to change on the part of the fire brigade? Do you believe that in 5 years from now we will have different types of communication, different processes? What do you think will have changed in 5 years? Well, I can only talk based on my experience. I believe that events will be perceived and handled differently by fire brigades as well as the authorities in general. The police university in Münster, the fire brigades, academies, and the local authorities' trainings institutes will actually look into this more deeply, and they will work towards closer cooperation with each other and with the other players involved in order to talk face to face, in order to really work together. The event trade should actually come up in a professional way and should actually talk to the corresponding authorities in a professional way. Mr. Kluge, if you look 5 years ahead, what is going to change in your area as a safety engineer? Will there be any changes or will everything remain as it is? I believe that there will be no revolutionary changes in the structure. The changes will not be so dramatic. The goals of protection will remain regulated and in a binding way, but there will be many examples of model solutions, of risk assessments that will serve as a basis for orientation for event organizers. There will be a much wider basis of comparison than we have seen in the past. Of course, the industry lives on coming up with something new all the time, with something that has never been there before. But nevertheless, we need a basis of experience, a comparison framework. And I hope and assume that in 5 years from now, we will have made some progress in this direction. After all, the associations are hardworking people and they work very much toward this. So further development based on documentation. Yes, whatever is going on in the field of BGE 810 and related topics, VPET, etc., model solutions that can be applied time and again. There will be different model solutions and they will be presented for comparison. Mr. Ruling, 5 years in the future, what will the situation be like? What will be different?
Well, 5 years in the future, looking at my crystal ball here, I think that there will be much more. I'm trying to think of how to express this. Certainly the standards that we have written will be better known. Many of them will be written into regulations, either directly by adopting the requirements of the standards into laws and regulations or by reference. But also other things are happening in the industry. I've been mainly talking about Plaza, but there have been some other organizations that have sort of sprung up. The term we use in America is grassroots. There's an organization called the Event Safety Alliance, which is really more the production people that do touring concerts. People who work, they are the interface between the artists and the venue and the people providing the technical services. And they have suddenly become aware that if a venue is unsafe, the artists are at risk. And so they are working very hard now to work into the artist contracts requirements for various different safety standards, for various different safety procedures. These are things that normally the artist contracts were more about what it's going to be in the dressing room, how much are they going to be paid, what's the dressing room going to be like, and all these sort of things. Well, now they're writing into those contracts also requirements that, for example, if it's an outside event, that the stage be constructed according to certain standards, that it be inspected by certain people. So there is going to be, whether or not there is actual legal regulation, I think in 5 years there will be a higher level of safety and awareness of safety and more safety planning than we have seen, say, in the last 5 years.
Okay, thank you. Herr Altenburger, selbe Frage an Sie. Schauen wir mal 5 Jahre in die
Mr. Altenburger, same question to you. Let us have a look into the crystal ball of Mr. Ruling, 5 years from now on. I fear that within 5 years we will have even more laws and regulations than we have now. The tolerance scope for events will become smaller, also under the aspect of security. Although, in my opinion, we persistently have to work on the security aspect of events. And 5 years from now, hopefully, many secure events have taken place without problems. Thank you. Mr. Löhr, what do you see happening within the next 5 years? I see expensive events, since the authorities claim more and more safety standards. To be honest, I find that development really exaggerated. It is very important to have a safety standard, but uncertainty on the side of the authorities leads to more and more regulations, except from Düsseldorf, since I know that Mr. Husmann works according to different standards. But in order to be on the safe side, safety regulations will be ever more comprehensive in order to minimize liability on the authority side. And this is my negative prediction for the next 5 years. So in your opinion, that means cost through safety. Mr. Neven, you have the final say.
Well, I believe that in the trade show business there won't be many changes. Safety precautions must remain affordable, and I hope that in sports and culture we will continue to have fun. After all, these events have been designed for the simple purpose of having fun. And of course, if you overregulate a concert, this is a negative thing. We have 10,000 young people in Germany who have been trained to be event organizing experts or event technicians. Safety aspects are considered in all these apprenticeships and trainings. So I believe that in the young generation there will be more and more people who are aware of their responsibility in the field of safety. Unfortunately, the Duisburg event had to take place in order to raise awareness. But on the other hand, it has created a high level of uncertainty. It was a deplorable event with 21 casualties, but the reaction has been that very often now the industry is overly cautious. Okay, now let us close the round. Thank you very much for having taken part in this expert panel. Thank you very much for your valuable contributions. Safety, yes, but we will have to adhere to safety in a moderate fashion. And I hope that with the event I-ESC 2013, we've been able to take a first step in the direction. Now, before everybody leaves the room, I would like to act in my capacity as the organizer of DVPT, the managing director of DVPT, and I would like to ask 2 gentlemen to come up on the stage, 3 gentlemen, that is, because the service providers are the one who play a key role in the organization of any event. DVPT is active in this field when it comes to certifying companies in the fields of occupational safety, event planning, and project management. And in this context, we need to take a holistic approach. I-ESC has just undergone this process. It has been able to get this certificate. Mr. Karl Grossig can now hand over the certificate. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Well, thank you very much. It's great to be able to do this brief ceremony in this context. Of course, service providers are key to an event like this. The VPIT members initiated this 5 or 6 years ago, and meanwhile we have so many associations that contribute. The Work Safety Committee is also represented, and we actually certify service providers. We have certified almost 12 service providers meanwhile, and now the Epicto company will be certified here. Yes, let me say it out loud, Epicto. Thank you very much for undergoing our certification procedure. I hope we've been able to help you also on the content side. It's not just about placing check marks in little boxes. No, it's about looking into the matters in depth, qualified people, tested material, technical reporting. These are the issues that we looked into, and we can actually fully confirm this to the company Epicto. So let me hand out the certificate to you. Now this is the final picture of the large round. Thank you very much for having come here, for contributing, and I hope to see you again next year. Goodbye.